Now let's say that what I want is like somewhere around here. At this point, what I want is I want the video to zoom in and quickly zoom out. Okay. So how can we do this using keyframes? So first of all, we're just going to click on this video so that we can see the properties here. Now, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, when it comes to zooming in and zooming out, which of these properties will relate to that? So you know that scaling will relate to that, because when you scale, it makes it bigger, and when you scale it outwards, you make this number smaller, it zooms out, right? So we know that, yes, this is the property. So one thing is that when it comes to keyframes, determine which property you'll be using. The next thing is you've got to figure out the starting point and the ending point, okay? So in this case, let's say at this particular point, I want the zooming in to start. So it's like, let's say somewhere, maybe I say, yeah, right here, I stop my timeline indicator. So your starting point is where you put your first keyframe. Okay, so this is the part where you'll start zooming in. And which keyframes? So keyframes are these little, do you see these diamond-like things that you see? These are keyframes, and you can see that they're next to all these properties, right? You can see next to scale, next to position, next to rotate. So depending on what you're trying to do, you're going to hit the keyframe. So for us, the important property right now is zooming in, zooming out, which is scaling. So we're going to hit our first keyframe here, because this is the first point where we want to start the zooming in process. So all you have to do is just hit this. That's it. Don't have to do anything else. And what you notice is right here, we get this keyframe, which is related to the scaling property. That's it. You don't do anything else right now. Okay. Now you've got to ask yourself, which is the point where you want the zooming in to end. So let's say the zooming in starts from here, and quickly I just want to zoom in up till, like, let's say up till here. Okay. And this is the part where the maximum zoom should have happened before it zooms out again to the original. Okay. So now what I've got to do here is I've got to add a second keyframe. So this is the maximum where the zoom stops. Again, all I need to right now just do is just hit the keyframe. That's it. We don't really need to do anything. You can see we've got a first keyframe which will start the thing, and this is the max where it'll stop zooming in, but we just put the keyframe. So there's no difference right now between these two keyframes because we've not changed anything here. We're just adding it at the right place. In this case, we also need to add a third keyframe. Why? Because it has zoomed in fully, but we are not done yet because we want it to zoom back to its origin, right? So we also need to add a third keyframe. Sometimes if the effect that you want is such that once it is, like for example, it is zoomed in, and maybe I just wanted it to stay zoomed in. I did not want it to zoom back. In that case, you don't require a third keyframe. Right? Which is going to be the case for our sliding thing. Remember, because when this is going to slide down, we want that to stay there. We don't want it to slide back upwards. So we'll actually only need two keyframes when we eventually do this for the sliding thing that we're going in for. So I hope you're understanding things. But here we need to add a third keyframe because we want it to come back to its original position. So let's say at this point, now I want it to start again zooming out, and by the time it reaches this point, I want it to come back to the original. This is where, again, I add the third keyframe. So I do this. Now we've got our keyframe positioning correct, also the properties correct. So we've got these two things done. The third part, the third step of this is that we just need to now change the property of that keyframe, which is going to add the effect. Which is the keyframe? Which is going to be the middle one, right? Because this is where we are saying that, yes, zoom in and then zoom out. So there's not going to be any change on the property of this keyframe. Why? Because this is the original zoom version. That's how the video was, right? There's also not going to be any change on the third keyframe. Why? Because we're zooming back to the original. So the scale number is not going to change on the first and the last keyframe, but the scaling will change in the middle. That's where we want it to zoom, right? So what you need to do now is whichever keyframe needs to be changed, click on it. So it turns blue. Now think of it like this. This is active and it's asking us, okay, Kush, we are ready. It's blue right now. Change whatever you need to. So what do we need to change? We need to scale this higher. We need to zoom in. So I say, all right, maybe up till this much. Okay. And that's it. We don't need to change on any of these two because it's going to take it back to the original, right? So that's it. Now just play this again and hopefully we'll get our effect. So let's check this. Have you seen the latest generative AI? Boom, that's it. Very simple, right? Now that you've understood the concept of keyframes, hopefully, if you've not just watched this video again, I know it can be confusing when you do it for the first time, actually do this, okay? Even if some of the other things that I'm teaching in this course you've not done practically, okay, just do this. No matter what video you have in front of you, practice this just once. It becomes very, very natural because this is something that will enable you to create any kind of movement, okay, that you want. But finally, now let's actually do this for our actual animation.